Hello there, night owls. Thank you for joining me as we drift gently into the past to uncover tales both fascinating and soporific. Whether you're curled up in bed, nodding off on the couch, or simply seeking a moment of calm, I'm glad you've joined me. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. Are you settling in for the night under cozy covers, or perhaps stealing a tranquil break in the midst of a busy day? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy these meandering journeys through history, designed to inform and relax in equal measure, consider subscribing to catch every episode. Tonight, we'll be venturing into the realm of medieval Europe, a time of great change, upheaval, and unfortunately, immense challenges for women, especially those with keen minds and fierce spirits. Life in the Middle Ages was no fairy tale for most, but for bright and ambitious women, it could be particularly brutal. Oppressive attitudes, rigid gender roles, and a lack of opportunity conspired to keep their potential firmly leashed. As we explore this topic, we'll meet women who dared to dream beyond society's suffocating constraints. Women who thirsted for knowledge in a world that denied them education. Women who sought to wield influence in the male-dominated spheres of power. Some managed to carve out extraordinary lives against all odds. Others met tragic fates, crushed under the weight of misogyny and superstition. Their stories may be centuries old, but the struggles they faced, to be seen, to be heard, to be respected, still resonate today. In celebrating their resilience and mourning their losses, we'll gain a deeper appreciation for how far we've come and how much further we have yet to go. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Imagine, if you will, the Europe of 1,000 years ago, a continent just emerging from the chaos and fragmentation that followed the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The remnants of classical learning preserved by Muslim scholars and Byzantine libraries had begun trickling back, sparking the first embers of what would become the Renaissance. But that glorious blossoming of art and intellect was still centuries away. For now, picture a land divided into a patchwork of feudal kingdoms and principalities. A rigidly hierarchical society, with noble lords ruling over vast estates worked by peasant farmers bound to the land. The Catholic Church reigned supreme, its ornate cathedrals towering over even the grandest castles, its doctrine dictating every aspect of life from birth to death and beyond. It was a world of extremes, of opulence and squalor, piety and brutality, chivalric codes and gritty realities. And for women, it was a world of severely circumscribed possibilities. The ideal woman was obedient, chaste, and submissive, a helpmeet to her husband, a nurturing mother to her children, a humble servant of God. Deviating from this narrowly prescribed path invited scandal at best, mortal peril at worst. Of course, women being the brilliant, multifaceted beings we are, not everyone was content to limit themselves to a life of domestic drudgery and meek compliance. Some longed to study and create, to influence and lead. But the path for women who dared to dream was fraught with obstacles and dangers. Let's meet one such woman now, a young noblewoman coming of age in the 12th century France. Imagine her as a girl on the cusp of womanhood, slender and graceful, with piercing blue eyes that seem to drink in every detail of the world around her. She has a quick, curious mind, one that delights in puzzling out the Latin phrases from her father's books and peppering the family priest with theological questions. As the daughter of a minor nobleman, she's been afforded a bit more education than most girls of her time. She can read a little, write her name, recite her prayers. But it's not enough to satisfy her hungry intellect. She longs to dive into the great works of philosophy, to debate learned scholars, to unravel the mysteries of the natural world. Alas, such pursuits are not meant for young ladies. Her father indulges her precocious intelligence to a point. After all, a witty, cultured bride will attract a better class of husband. But he also recognizes the danger in letting her mind roam too freely. An overeducated wife, he knows, is a recipe for discord and scandal. Best to rein in her studies before they lead her astray. And so, on her 14th birthday, instead of the precious illuminated manuscript she's been coveting, her father presents her with a betrothal contract. She's to wed the eldest son of a neighbouring baron, uniting two noble houses and estates. Her future is sealed in ink and wax, a life of managing a household and bearing heirs stretching out before her like a sentence. She wants to protest, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Why should her brothers be sent off to university to train as knights and clergy and statesmen, while she's bartered away like chattel? Why should her worth be measured only in her dowry and her womb? But she knows such outbursts will change nothing. Her path has been charted by forces far beyond her control. As she stands at the altar, draped in the finest silks and brocades, she feels a part of herself wither. The sparkling-eyed girl, who dreamed of a life of the mind, is packed away like a childish toy, replaced by a young woman who must navigate the very real challenges and constraints of her new role. She will do her duty, manage her household with skill and grace, bear strong sons to carry on the family name. But a piece of her will always mourn the loss of the bright, boundless future that was never truly hers to claim. Our noblewoman's story was all too common in the Middle Ages. For the vast majority of women, even those of high birth, the opportunity to cultivate their minds was vanishingly rare. Convents offered a glimmer of hope. Within their cloistered walls, nuns enjoyed access to libraries and scriptoria, time to study and write away from the demands of a marriage and motherhood. Some noblewomen, especially widows who could control their own estates, also managed to carve out spaces for intellectual growth. But these were the fortunate few. Most women, high-born and low, were utterly shut out from formal learning. Literacy rates were dismally low, with perhaps only 1 in 10 women able to read, and even fewer able to write. Girls might be taught enough to recite their prayers and manage basic household accounts, but serious study in fields like theology, law, medicine, or natural philosophy. Unthinkable. It wasn't just a lack of access holding women back. It was a pervasive belief in their intellectual inferiority. The writings of classical philosophers like Aristotle and early church fathers like Augustine painted women as irrational, emotionally unstable creatures, inherently less capable of reason and virtue than men. These ideas, filtered through the lens of medieval Christian doctrine, created a culture that saw educating women as not only unnecessary, but potentially dangerous. An educated woman, after all, might start to question her ordained place in the world. She might chafe at the limitations placed on her, the assumption of her weakness and subservience. She might, God forbid, start getting ideas above her station. In a society that depended on everyone knowing and accepting their role in the great chain of being, a woman who sought to break out of her designated sphere was seen as not just an aberration, but a threat to the very fabric of civilization. And so, for an intelligent young woman with dreams of something more, the message was clear. Forget your foolish fantasies of education and independence. Learn to be satisfied with a life in the shadows, in service to your father, your husband, your sons. It's simply the way of the world, ordained by nature and by God. But of course, human nature being what it is, not every woman was content to accept this bleak fate lying down. Scattered through the historical record, we find tantalizing glimpses of women who managed, against all odds, to make their mark on the medieval world through wit, will, and sheer audacity. One such woman was the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen consort of both France and England over her long and tumultuous life. Born in 1122 to one of the wealthiest and most powerful noble families in Europe, Eleanor was renowned from a young age for her beauty, vivacity, and razor-sharp intellect. Highly educated by the standards of her day, she could read and write in Latin as well as her native Poitevin dialect, and was a skilled diplomat with a keen grasp of politics and intrigue. At 15, Eleanor married the future King Louis VII of France, beginning a royal career marked by both splendor and strife. She joined her husband on the Second Crusade to the Holy Land, an unprecedented act for a woman, leading her own contingent of knights and ladies through treacherous foreign lands. But the marriage itself was troubled. Louis was a pious and stolid man, ill-matched to Eleanor's mercurial brilliance. After 15 years and no sons, the union was annulled. Undaunted, Eleanor swiftly secured an even more advantageous match, wedding Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy, and heir to the English throne. Their tempestuous marriage produced 8 children, including 2 future kings, and presided over a vast empire stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. Eleanor was no mere consort. She was a force to be reckoned with, a savvy political operator who wielded immense influence in both the French and English courts. But her power and prestige came at a price. Her marital disputes with Henry were legendary, fueled by his flagrant infidelities and her own headstrong nature. When their sons rebelled against Henry in 1173, Eleanor was accused of supporting the uprising and placed under house arrest. She would spend the next 16 years as a prisoner, moved from castle to castle at Henry's whim, her freedom and her authority stripped away. Lesser women might have broken under such treatment, retreating into passivity and despair. But Eleanor endured, drawing on reserves of resilience and cunning that had served her well throughout her extraordinary life. When Henry died in 1189, she re-emerged as a power in her own right, serving as regent for her son Richard the Lionheart, while he was off on the Third Crusade. She navigated the treacherous waters of international diplomacy, brokering alliances and treaties, using her formidable intellect and political acumen to secure her family's position. Eleanor's story is a testament to the indomitable spirit of brilliant women in the face of incredible adversity. In a time when women were seen as little more than property to be traded and controlled, she managed to carve out a space for herself as a true player on the world stage. She was not immune to the strictures and perils faced by all women of her time. Indeed, she spent nearly 2 decades as a political prisoner, her agency stripped away by an angry husband. But she also demonstrated the heights a woman of intelligence and determination could reach, even in the most hostile of circumstances. Of course, Eleanor was in many ways an exception, her lofty status giving her opportunities denied to most of her sex. For women further down the social ladder, the consequences of asserting their intelligence and autonomy could be dire indeed. The tale of one such woman, a clever peasant wife in the 14th century England, illustrates the brutality that could be brought to bear on women who dared to question their place. Life for a medieval peasant was harsh and unrelenting. A constant struggle against hunger, disease, and backbreaking labor. For women, the burden was even heavier. In addition to working in the fields alongside their husbands, they were responsible for all the domestic duties: cooking, cleaning, spinning, weaving, brewing, tending to children and animals. A wife was expected to be her husband's helpmate and servant, deferring to his authority in all things. Our peasant woman was no stranger to hard work and hardship. From the time she could walk, she'd been put to work, first caring for younger siblings, then helping her mother with the endless round of household chores. At 14, she was married off to a boy from the neighboring village, trading one life of drudgery for another. But despite the grinding poverty and ceaseless toil, she possessed a lively mind and an independent spirit. She had a way with herbs and poultices, a knack for coaxing ailing livestock back to health. The other village women sought her advice on everything from settling colicky babies to getting a stubborn loaf to rise. Her clever hands could weave the most intricate patterns. Her nimble fingers plait the finest straw hats. Her husband, a stolid and unimaginative man, didn't quite know what to make of his quick-witted wife. He was proud of her skills, the extra pennies her handiwork brought in. But he was also wary of her sharp tongue, the way she sometimes questioned his decisions or offered her own ideas. It wasn't fitting, he thought, for a woman to be so bold. Matters came to a head one autumn, when the rains were late and the harvest looked to be a poor one. The husband decreed they would slaughter their pig and salt the meat to ensure a supply of food for the winter. But his wife disagreed. The pig, she argued, was their one valuable asset. If they could keep it alive, it would farrow in the spring, giving them a litter of piglets to sell. They could weather a lean season, she insisted, but losing the pig would impoverish them for years. Her husband was furious at being challenged so openly, and in front of the other men of the village no less. It was his prerogative as head of the household to make such decisions, and his wife's duty to obey. Enraged and humiliated, he dragged her home and beat her viciously, determined to break her willful spirit and reassert his authority. The woman endured her husband's abuse in agonized silence, knowing any outcry would only bring more trouble. In the close-knit world of the medieval village, a wife who defied her husband was seen as a disruptive and dangerous force, a threat to the God-given order of things. Best to suffer in quiet, to swallow her pain and her pride, to submit as a good wife should. But something in her broke along with her bones. The light in her eyes, the quick wit and daring that had sustained her through so many trials, seemed to gutter and fade. She went through the motions of her days, tending to her work with grim efficiency. But the spark that had made her exceptional was gone, ground out by the unyielding pressure to conform. It's a story that played out countless times in the Middle Ages, with variations across class and circumstance. For peasant women, the demands of sheer survival left little room for intellectual or creative fulfillment. Their worth was measured in their ability to labor and breed, to serve their husbands and their lords. Any deviation from that script, any hint of a woman overstepping her bounds, was met with swift and often brutal suppression. Even women who managed to secure a measure of learning or influence weren't safe from the ever-present threat of violence and subjugation. Theirs was a precarious position, always at the mercy of the men who held power over them. A woman who was seen as too intelligent, too independent, too threatening to the status quo could easily find herself on the receiving end of some of the Middle Ages' most fearsome tools of control, and none were more terrible than the accusation of witchcraft. In the medieval mind, a woman's intellect was a dangerous thing. A woman who knew too much, who exercised too much power, who refused to conform to her prescribed role, was suspect, and in a world steeped in superstition, where any misfortune from a failed harvest to a sickly child could be attributed to malevolent magic, a suspect woman could easily find herself branded a witch. The image of the witch in the Middle Ages was a conflation of various folk traditions, pagan remnants, and Christian anxieties about the diabolical. Witches were believed to be in league with the devil, wielding unholy powers to curse their neighbors, blight crops, and corrupt the faithful. They were depicted as the inverse of the ideal medieval woman, unruly, unchaste, uncontrolled, a threat to the divinely ordained order of society. Of course, the reality was far more mundane and tragic. Most of the women accused of witchcraft were not powerful sorceresses, but rather society's most vulnerable members. Widows, beggars, outcasts, anyone who didn't fit neatly into the prescribed social order. Women who practiced traditional healing or midwifery were particularly at risk, their knowledge of herbs and bodily functions easily twisted into something sinister. Such was the case of Marguerite Porete, a French mystic and writer who ran afoul of the Inquisition in the early 14th century. A beguine, a member of a lay religious community of women, Marguerite was a learned and articulate theologian, author of a complex spiritual treatise called The Mirror of Simple Souls. In it, she described a path to divine union that sidestepped the church hierarchy, a radical notion in a time when the church jealously guarded its role as intermediary between God and the faithful. Marguerite's ideas, her claim to direct spiritual authority, made her a threat in the eyes of the religious establishment. She was tried for heresy by the Inquisition, her book condemned as full of errors and heresies. She was given a chance to recant, to submit to the church's authority and disavow her teachings. But Marguerite refused, insisting on the truth of her spiritual insights. Her defiance sealed her fate. In 1310, Marg, as we've seen, the extraordinary women who did manage to make their mark in medieval times had to overcome immense obstacles to do so. Despite the oppressive attitudes and institutions that held sway, a few remarkable individuals still found ways to develop their intellects and have an impact on the world around them. One such woman was Marie de France, a 12th century poet who wrote in the Anglo-Norman language. Little is known for certain about her life, but it's believed she was born into the French nobility and later lived in England. What is clear is that she was extremely well educated for a woman of her time, fluent not just in her native tongue, but in Latin and English as well. In an era when most poetry was composed by men and focused on male exploits, like battles and quests, Marie turned her perceptive eye to the inner lives of women. Her works, including a series of narrative poems called the Lays, explore themes of courtly love, desire, heartbreak, and the constraints placed on women by society's expectations. Through vivid characters like the clever queen who tricks her aging husband into granting her freedom to take a younger lover, Marie gave voice to the unspoken frustrations and yearnings of women trapped in unhappy marriages and restricted roles. Her empathy for her heroines and insight into human nature still resonate with readers today. Imagine Marie as a young woman, her agile mind absorbing the learning available to her through her noble family's resources. Perhaps she found a kindred spirit in an open-minded tutor or a sympathetic abbess who nurtured her gift for language and storytelling. Even so, she must have faced constant reminders that as a woman, her brilliance would always be constrained. Picture her sitting by a window, quill in hand, parchment spread before her. She gazes out at a walled garden, the beauty of the roses and shimmering fountains belying the narrowness of a world that hems women in on all sides. In the poems flowing from her pen, Marie gives the women of her imagination a taste of the freedom and fulfillment so often denied to her and her contemporaries in real life. Writing in a vernacular language rather than the male-dominated Latin, Marie made her work accessible to female readers who were shut out from most literature. Knowing her audience faced the same suffocating limitations she did, she offered them stories that acknowledged their struggles and affirmed that their desires and dreams mattered. In her Lai Lamval, Marie describes a knight who's an outsider at King Arthur's court, neglected and misunderstood. When a beautiful fairy queen falls in love with him, she gives him all he longs for on the condition that he keep their bond secret. Lanval breaks his promise to confide in Queen Guinevere when she attempts to seduce him and is harshly punished until his fairy lover appears to save him and take him away to her mystical island. While Lanval is a man, his experience of being stifled, overlooked, and having to hide his true self would have resonated with many medieval women. Marie slips a subtle critique of her society's injustices between the lines of a romantic adventure. Her fairy queen embodies the power, independence, and loyalty women were so rarely allowed to experience themselves. Despite her talents, Marie de France remains elusive to us today, a shadowy figure we strain to glimpse through the mists of time. No contemporary images of her survive, and only a few scant details of her life can be guessed at. Like so many brilliant women of her age, she faded into obscurity, leaving behind only a faint echo of her voice in the exquisite poems that bear her name. But what a voice it is, by turns playful, melancholy, sensual, and wise. In the L'Aïe Chèvrefoil, Marie recounts the legendary love story of Tristan and Isolde, but from Isolde's perspective rather than focusing on the male hero as was typical. Her Isolde is no passive damsel, but a complex woman who actively chooses love over duty, though it means risking everything. It's tempting to imagine that Marie poured some of her own longing for agency into Isolde's character. Constricted by circumstances she couldn't control, did she dream of a love so powerful it could break through all boundaries? Or did she make her own bold bid for self-determination by daring to write, by insisting that women's stories were worth telling? We can only speculate, but it's a testament to Marie's genius that her creations continue to spark our imagination and stir our hearts 9 centuries later. Through her luminous poetry, she has achieved a kind of immortality, transcending the limits placed on her in life to speak to us still. Hers is just one example of a brilliant female mind that found a way to shine despite the shadows of prejudice and oppression. But for every Marie de France whose name is still remembered, there must have been countless more whose lights were snuffed out before they could even begin to blaze. The tragedy is that we'll never know what astonishing works of art, scientific breakthroughs, or visionary ideas the world was robbed of by the systematic suppression of female intellect in the Middle Ages. How many women with the potential to change history were forced into silence, their gifts withering on the vine? It's a sobering thought, but one that makes the defiant achievements of women like Marie de France all the more remarkable. Against all odds, they found ways to learn, to create, to make their voices heard. They left us a precious legacy, a reminder of the resilience and unstoppable power of the human spirit. So as we drift off to sleep, let's hold a place in our hearts for the brilliant medieval women whose stories have been lost to time. May their forgotten struggles and triumphs light a flame of inspiration in us, a call to nurture the gifts and dreams of every girl and woman fighting to make her mark on a world that's still far from equal. Their voices echo forward, a reminder that progress is hard-won, but always possible. And in our own small way, each of us can be a part of expanding the possibilities for the next generation. By honoring the powerful whispers of the past, we pave the way for a future where every light has a chance to shine. As we reflect on the extraordinary accomplishments of rare medieval women like Hildegard of Bingen and Christine de Pizan, it's worth pausing to consider the broader context of their lives. These brilliant visionary women were remarkable exceptions in a world that systematically suppressed female intellect. Their stories stand out all the more vividly against the backdrop of the immense challenges intelligent women faced in the Middle Ages. Imagine for a moment the thousands upon thousands of clever girls and women whose talents were left to wither on the vine. Picture the young peasant girl with a quick mind and a curiosity about the natural world. She longs to learn, to explore, to discover, but instead, from a tender age, she is put to work, cooking, cleaning, hauling water, tending to younger siblings. There is no time for learning, no opportunity to nurture her intellect. Her cleverness becomes a burden, a restless energy with no outlet. Or consider the merchant's daughter, able to read and write, with a keen head for numbers. She could be a brilliant accountant, a shrewd businesswoman, but her fate is sealed by her gender. She will be married off, her skills confined to running a household. Her sharp mind is dulled by the endless repetition of domestic tasks. And then there are the whispered tragedies, the women whose intelligence became their undoing. In a society that prized female obedience and conformity, a woman who dared to question, to challenge, to think for herself, could quickly find herself in peril. An accusation of witchcraft, a charge of heresy, could be a death sentence. The very qualities that might have made her an intellectual leader in another time and place. Her insight, her independence of thought, her boldness, become the instruments of her destruction. It's a grim tapestry, this portrait of stifled potential and silenced voices. But it's essential to acknowledge this history, to recognize the scale of the loss. For every Hildegard or Christine who managed, against all odds, to let her light shine, there were countless others snuffed out before they could even begin to gleam. And yet, even in the face of such oppression, the human spirit proved irrepressible. In quiet corners and hidden spaces, women found ways to nurture their minds and spirits. In the scriptoria of convents, nuns preserved and copied texts, maintaining a flickering flame of learning. In the kitchens and still rooms of great houses, women brewed herbal remedies and passed down ancient wisdom. And in the privacy of their own thoughts, countless women dreamed and wondered and kept alive the spark of curiosity that is the hallmark of all great minds. As we look back on this complex legacy, it's tempting to feel a sense of despair at all that was lost, all the brilliance that was squandered. But we can also feel a sense of awe at the resilience, the tenacity, the sheer determination of the women who, against all odds, found ways to let their intelligence shine. Their stories serve as a reminder that the human thirst for knowledge, for understanding, for growth, can never be fully extinguished. That even in the darkest times, the most oppressive circumstances, the light of the mind finds a way to break through. And as we trace the long, slow journey from those medieval constraints to the expanded opportunities of the modern age, we can draw inspiration from those pioneers, from the women who dared to think, to question, to challenge, even when the consequences could be dire. They laid the groundwork, brick by painstaking brick, for the edifice of women's education and empowerment that we continue to build today. So let us honor their legacy, not just with words, but with actions, by nurturing the minds of girls and women around the world, by creating spaces where their intellect can flourish, their curiosity can roam free, by challenging the lingering echoes of those old oppressions wherever we find them. In doing so, we pay tribute to the brilliant women of the past who were denied their chance to fully shine. We carry forward their torch, ensuring that their struggles, their sacrifices, their indomitable spirits were not in vain. And we build a future where no clever mind will ever again be left to languish in darkness, where the light of intelligence, regardless of gender, will be free to illuminate our world. As we come to the end of our journey through this shadowed chapter of history, let us carry with us a renewed appreciation for the hard-won progress we enjoy today, and let us resolve to honor the memory of those brilliant, suppressed women of the past by working towards a world where every mind, male or female, is free to reach its full potential. In that spirit, let us end our story here, in the quiet of the night. May the tales of these remarkable women, both the celebrated and the forgotten, weave through your dreams. May they inspire you, as they have inspired countless others, to nurture your own intellect and to champion the minds of others. And may we all work together to build a world where the phrase intelligent women is no longer a rarity to be remarked upon, but a glorious commonplace, a shining thread woven through the grand tapestry of human achievement. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the complex, often tragic, always fascinating history of intelligent women in the Middle Ages. May your dreams be filled with visions of a brighter future, where brilliance knows no bounds of gender, and where every mind is free to soar. Good night, and sweet dreams. Despite the crushing limitations placed upon women's potential, a few extraordinary individuals still managed to make their mark on history through sheer determination and brilliance. One such remarkable figure was Hildegard of Bingen. Born in 1098 to a noble family in the Rhineland, Hildegard was tutored in Latin and the scriptures as a young girl before being dedicated to the church at age 8. Placed under the care of a devout noblewoman named Jutta, Hildegard joined a community of women living a quiet life of prayer and contemplation. But even within the confines of monastic life, Hildegard's keen intellect and insatiable curiosity could not be contained. She voraciously studied religious texts, philosophy, and music. Her knowledge of herbal medicine became renowned, but most remarkably, from the age of 43 onwards, Hildegard began experiencing vivid spiritual visions, which she recorded in intricate detail, along with her theological interpretations. Despite being a woman in an institution dominated by men, Hildegard's wisdom and piety earned her an esteemed reputation. Her advice was sought by bishops, popes, and kings. With support from powerful church figures, she established her own abbey at Rupertsberg and went on to compose a treasure trove of beautiful sacred music, becoming one of the most prolific composers of her age. Hildegard also penned groundbreaking works of theology, natural history, and medical texts. Her holistic approach to healing incorporated prayer, herbs, gemstones, and dietary recommendations. She even invented her own secret alphabet. Hildegard's visionary writings, though controversial, brought her fame as a prophet and mystic. She fearlessly criticized corruption in the church and called for reform. Hildegard accomplished all this while serving as abbess, overseeing the spiritual lives of her nuns, carrying out diplomatic missions, and even going on preaching tours across Germany, utterly unheard of for a 12th century woman. Her story is one of a brilliant female mind pushing back against the constraints of her society to make a lasting impact. Even today, Hildegard is revered as a saint and doctor of the Church. Another extraordinary woman who defied medieval limitations was Christine de Pizan. Born in Venice in 1364, Christine had the good fortune to be the daughter of a scholar who worked as the court astrologer to the King of France. Growing up in the royal court, she enjoyed a superb education usually reserved for boys, studying classical literature, languages, and the sciences. At 15, Christine married a royal secretary and bore 3 children, but her happy domestic life was shattered when her husband died of the plague, followed shortly after by the death of her father and the king. At 25, Christine found herself a widow responsible for her mother and children, her inheritance tied up in legal disputes. Facing poverty, this clever young woman did something unthinkable for her time. She picked up her pen and launched a career as a professional writer, the first woman in Europe known to have done so. Drawing upon her education and lyrical talent, Christine began penning beautiful poems which earned praise from the nobility and the patronage of wealthy admirers. But Christine was not content to limit herself to courtly verses. Her intellect had been sharpened by hardship and the bitter realities faced by women. She engaged in fierce written debates with male scholars, eloquently rebutting their misogynistic views and championing the dignity, worth, and wisdom of women. Her most famous work, The Book of the City of Ladies, is an allegorical masterpiece celebrating great female figures throughout history and imagining an ideal city populated and governed entirely by accomplished women. Christine went on to write many more works on the art of warfare, political theory, biography, and autobiography. She was even enlisted by the royal court to write a manual on chivalry. In a medieval society where women were dismissed as frivolous and irrational, Christine proved through her erudite body of work that a brilliant female mind was the equal of any man's. Though a century would pass before the word feminist emerged, Christine is often hailed as the first feminist thinker of the Western tradition. Living by her pen until age 65, she left behind a remarkable legacy as a self-made woman of letters. Christine's story reminds us of the immense potential that was suppressed when women were denied education and agency. One can only imagine how many other brilliant female minds were silenced over the centuries. As the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, the opportunities for women to learn and participate in intellectual life expanded gradually. The advent of the printing press in the 15th century slowly increased access to books and ideas. Daughters of humanist scholars began receiving classical educations. Noblewomen found new roles as patrons of the arts and leaders of salons. But progress was painfully slow and uneven. Even in the Enlightenment era of the 18th century, a blue-stocking woman who displayed her intellect too boldly still risked ridicule and ostracism. Limitations on women's legal rights and access to universities continued well into the modern era. The global struggle for female education, though much advanced, remains unfinished even today. So as we reflect back on the plight of intelligent women in the Middle Ages, we cannot help but marvel at figures like Hildegard and Christine, who found ways to develop and express their brilliant minds against suffocating odds. But we must also mourn the countless women of talent and genius who were crushed beneath the weight of oppressive custom and willful ignorance, their lights extinguished before they ever had a chance to shine. The hard-won victories of women across the centuries to access education, to have their voices heard, to take part fully in intellectual and public life. These are triumphs we must cherish and strive to extend to all. For the beauty of the female mind is an incandescent power, an untapped resource of creativity and wisdom that has the potential to illuminate our shared path forward. The work of unleashing that limitless potential is the great unfinished task handed down to us from our foremothers of ages past. As we ponder these truths in the sheltering dark, we carry their memory and their mission forward into our dreams. Like a fluttering torch passed from hand to hand, we bear the hope that one day, in a world yet to be, no woman's brilliance will be hidden under a bushel, silenced, or forced to fade. That every girl may be free to nurture the vast possibilities of her mind is the vision we carry in our hearts until the coming of dawn's gentle light. As we delve deeper into the lives of intelligent women in medieval Europe, it's important to recognize the extraordinary feats of those rare individuals who managed to defy societal constraints and leave their mark on history. Despite the immense barriers they faced, a handful of exceptional women rose above the limitations of their time to make groundbreaking contributions in fields ranging from music and literature to science and politics. One such remarkable figure was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German Benedictine abbess who shone as a brilliant polymath in an age when women were largely excluded from intellectual pursuits. Born into a noble family in 1098, Hildegard was dedicated to the church at a young age and entered a monastery where she received a rudimentary education. But her innate intelligence and curiosity drove her to expand her knowledge far beyond what was typically allowed for women of her time. As Hildegard grew into her role as an abbess, her extraordinary talents began to flourish. She was a gifted composer, writing soaring hymns and sequences that are still performed and admired today for their beauty and complexity. Her music was infused with her deep spirituality, and she believed that singing was a way to connect with the divine. But Hildegard's brilliance extended far beyond music. She was also a prolific writer, penning theological treatises, scientific works, and even an invented language. Her magnum opus, Scivias, was a collection of 26 mystical visions that offered profound insights into the nature of God and the universe. Its stunning illuminations and complex symbolism were unlike anything that had been seen before. Hildegard's visionary writings earned her fame and respect throughout Europe. She corresponded with popes, emperors, and other powerful figures, offering guidance and advice on matters both spiritual and political. Her reputation as a wise and holy woman grew to such an extent that she was even consulted by King Henry II of England. But Hildegard was not content to limit her influence to the realm of ideas. She was also a skilled herbalist and healer, and she wrote extensively on the medicinal properties of plants and minerals. Her book, Physica, was a comprehensive guide to the natural world, covering everything from the elements to the human body. What made Hildegard's achievements all the more remarkable was that she accomplished them in the face of significant obstacles. As a woman in a male-dominated church, she had to fight for every opportunity to learn and express herself. She faced skepticism and even hostility from some quarters, with critics dismissing her visions as mere hallucinations or worse, the work of the devil. Yet Hildegard persevered, driven by an unshakable faith in her own abilities and a deep sense of purpose. She saw her gifts as a divine calling, and she worked tirelessly to fulfill what she believed was her destiny. Her legacy is a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most daunting of challenges. As we marvel at Hildegard's extraordinary life, it's worth noting that she was not entirely alone in her achievements. While opportunities for women were severely limited in medieval Europe, there were other remarkable figures who managed to break through the barriers and make their mark on history. One such woman was Christine de Pizan, a 14th century Italian-French author who is often considered the first professional female writer in Europe. Born in Venice in 1364, Christine was the daughter of a court astrologer who encouraged her intellectual pursuits from a young age. She received an unusually comprehensive education for a girl of her time, learning Latin, literature, and the sciences. When Christine's husband died suddenly in 1389, leaving her a widow with 3 young children to support, she turned to writing as a means of survival. She began penning love ballads and other courtly poems, which quickly gained popularity among the nobility. Her skill with words and her insights into the human heart made her a sought-after figure in literary circles. But Christine was not content to limit herself to the traditional feminine genres of poetry and romance. She soon turned her pen to more serious subjects, writing treatises on politics, history, and philosophy. Her most famous work, The Book of the City of Ladies, was a spirited defense of women against the misogynistic attitudes of her time. In the book, Christine imagines a symbolic city inhabited by great women from history and legend, from warriors and queens to scholars and saints. Through their stories, she argues for the intelligence, virtue, and capabilities of women and challenges the notion that they are inherently inferior to men. Christine's bold stance made her a controversial figure in some quarters, but it also won her admiration and respect. She became a sought-after advisor to kings and nobles, and her works were widely read and discussed throughout Europe. Her legacy paved the way for future generations of female writers and thinkers who looked to her as a model of what was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As we reflect on the stories of Hildegard of Bingen, Christine de Pizan, and other remarkable women of the Middle Ages, it's important to recognize that their achievements were not just individual triumphs, but glimpses of a brighter future for all women. Through their courage, intelligence, and determination, they challenged the status quo and showed that women were capable of so much more than society believed. Of course, progress was slow and uneven. The rigid hierarchies and entrenched attitudes of medieval Europe did not disappear overnight, and women continued to face significant barriers to education, expression, and autonomy for centuries to come. But the seeds of change had been planted, and the examples set by these pioneering women would inspire and embolden others to follow in their footsteps. As we look back on this pivotal period in history from the vantage point of the present day, it's clear that the struggle for gender equality is far from over. Women around the world still face discrimination, violence, and limited opportunities in many areas of life. But the stories of the past remind us of how far we have come, and how much we owe to the brave and brilliant women who came before us. In the end, the lives of intelligent women in medieval Europe were a testament to the resilience and potential of the human spirit. Despite the immense challenges they faced, these women found ways to learn, create, and make their voices heard. They left a legacy that echoes through the ages, inspiring us to continue the fight for a world where every person, regardless of gender, has the opportunity to fulfill their deepest potential. As we drift off to sleep, let us hold these stories close to our hearts and dream of a future where the brilliance of every mind can shine freely. For in the end, the measure of a society is not just in its technological or economic achievements, but in its ability to nurture and celebrate the full range of human talent and potential. The women of medieval Europe, in all their struggles and triumphs, remind us of the immense power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of circumstances. May their examples continue to light the way forward as we work towards a world where every person has the chance to live a life of purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. Against the looming shadows of the monastery walls, Hildegard pressed on with her writings, squinting in the flickering candlelight. Her hand moved swiftly across the parchment, spilling forth treatises on medicine, botany, theology, knowledge gleaned through the sharpness of her mind and the intensity of her devotion. In a world that demanded women be silent and subservient, Hildegard's voice rang out clear and strong. Born in 1098 to a noble family in what is now Germany, Hildegard was tutored by the anchoress Jutta in the Benedictine cloister of Disibodenberg. Even as a child, her gifts were apparent: vivid spiritual visions, a voracious intellect, an iron will. But such qualities were seen as unnatural, even dangerous in a woman. It was only the protection of the Church, the recognition of her visions as divinely inspired, that allowed her to flourish. Under Hildegard's leadership, the convent at Rupertsberg became a vibrant centre of learning, where women could study, write, and explore the mysteries of God's creation. Her fame spread far and wide, earning her the respect of popes, emperors, and scholars alike. Yet, even as she corresponded with the great minds of Europe, Hildegard never forgot the simple women under her care, the nuns whose voices joined hers in soaring chants of praise. For make no mistake, Hildegard was a woman of deep faith who saw the divine in all things, in the greenness of the earth, the cycle of the seasons, the intricacies of the human body. Her scientific writings, though shot through with religious symbolism, were based on keen observation and deduction. She wrote of the medicinal properties of plants, the balance of the humours, the paths of the stars, a treasure trove of knowledge in an age when such things were oft dismissed as superstition. But perhaps Hildegard's most enduring legacy is her music. Haunting, ethereal, it soars with a purity and power that still moves listeners to this day. For Hildegard, music was the bridge between heaven and earth, a way to express the inexpressible. In a time when the Church frowned upon frivolity, she dared to claim that beauty, too, was a path to the divine. Hildegard's story is one of triumph against the odds, of a brilliant mind that refused to be stifled. But it is also a reminder of how much was lost, how many other women of talent were silenced by the unyielding hand of patriarchy. For every Hildegard who managed to make her mark, how many more were crushed beneath the weight of societal expectations. We see another glimmer of defiance in the life of Christine de Pizan, born in Venice in 1364. The daughter of a court astrologer, Christine had the rare good fortune of an education, learning to read and write at a young age. She would put those skills to good use when, widowed at 25, she became Europe's first professional female author to support her family. In an age when women were expected to be chaste, silent, and obedient, Christine's pen was her sword. She wrote boldly in defense of her gender, arguing for women's education and against misogyny. Her most famous work, The Book of the City of Ladies imagines a utopian city populated solely by great and virtuous women of history, a powerful rebuke to the notion of female inferiority. Like Hildegard, Christine was a woman ahead of her time, a lone voice crying out for justice in a world not yet ready to listen. Her writings, spread widely thanks to the new technology of the printing press, would plant seeds of change that would blossom centuries later. But in her own lifetime, she remained an anomaly, a curiosity, praised for her wit and learning, yet still hemmed in by the narrow confines of her sex. As the candles gutter and the night grows deep, we are left to ponder the lives of these extraordinary women, bright flames that manage to light the darkness, if only for a time. In their stories, we catch glimpses of the immense potential that was so often snuffed out, the brilliance that was suppressed in service to a world that did not yet know how to value it. We think of the unnamed multitudes, the clever girls denied schooling, the sharp-tongued wives beaten into silence, the wise women condemned as witches. We mourn for all that was lost, all the Hildegards and Christines, whose voices were never heard, whose gifts were never nurtured. And yet, even in the face of such sorrow, we cannot help but marvel at the resilience of the human spirit, the unquenchable thirst for knowledge and expression. For in the end, the legacy of these women is one of hope, hope that even in the darkest of times, the light of the mind cannot be fully extinguished. As we drift off to sleep, let us carry that hope with us, that spark of defiance against a world that would deny us our full humanity. Let us dream of a future where every voice is heard, every gift cherished, every mind free to soar to its greatest heights. For that is the world Hildegard and Christine fought for, the world we must continue to build. One story, one song, one daring act of creation at a time. As we've seen, the extraordinary accomplishments of women like Hildegard of Bingen and Christine de Pizan shine all the brighter against the bleak backdrop of the Middle Ages. Their stories are a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit, the irrepressible thirst for knowledge and creation that can flourish even in the most hostile of environments. But for each Hildegard or Christine, whose name has endured through the centuries, there were doubtless countless more brilliant women lost to history. Women whose keen minds and perceptive insights were silenced, suppressed, stamped out before they ever had a chance to leave their mark on the world. Imagine the soaring cathedrals that were never designed, the groundbreaking philosophical treatises that were never written, the life-saving medical advances that were never discovered, all because half of humanity was systematically denied the opportunity to develop and express their intellectual gifts. It's a staggering loss, not just for those individual women, but for society as a whole. Who knows what marvels we might have seen, what progress we might have made, if the Middle Ages had not been quite so dark and constricting a time for women of intelligence. And yet, even in the face of such unrelenting oppression, the irrepressible human spirit found ways to assert itself. In the hushed scriptoriums of convents, nuns painstakingly copied and illuminated manuscripts, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. In the birthing chambers and sick rooms of villages, wise women drew on ancient oral traditions to heal and comfort, their hard-earned wisdom passed down from mother to daughter. And in the halls of power, women like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Catherine of Siena proved that a formidable intellect, when paired with courage and force of will, could indeed move mountains, or at least shake the foundations of kingdoms and papal authority. These flickers of light, brief and beleaguered though they were, kept the flame of women's intellectual potential burning through the long, grim centuries of the Middle Ages. They paved the way for the slow but inexorable progress that would come in fits and starts over the generations that followed. From the salons of the Enlightenment, where women like Madame de Staël held court and shaped the cultural conversations of their day, to the lecture halls of the 19th century, where pioneers like Maria Mitchell and Nettie Stevens blazed trails in the sciences, each generation built upon the achievements of the last. It was a legacy hard-won by the blood, sweat, and tears of countless women who fought for the right to learn, to explore, to create. Women who faced down scorn, threat, and violence, who sacrificed comfort and convention, all for the chance to exercise their minds and leave their mark on the world. And while we still have far to go in the fight for true intellectual equity, we stand today on the shoulders of those giants. The women of the Middle Ages who dared to think, to question, to dream, even in the face of a world determined to keep them ignorant and compliant. As we drift off to sleep, let us hold a space in our hearts for those unsung heroines of history. May their stories remind us to cherish the hard-won freedoms we enjoy today, and to continue striving for a world in which no brilliant mind is left to languish in darkness simply because of the body it inhabits. And so, with a quiet reverence for the brave and brilliant women who came before, and a drowsy sense of gratitude for the soft pillow beneath our head and the sweet liberty to dream undimmed by oppression, let us slip softly into the welcoming embrace of sleep. Good night, dear listener. May your slumber be deep, and your dreams as boundless as the soaring spirit of those unvanquished medieval heroines of the mind. For even in the darkest of times, the light of human resilience and potential can never be fully extinguished. It simply waits, like an ember in the ashes, for the right breath of inspiration to fan it once more into glorious flame. As we've seen, the extraordinary accomplishments of rare individuals like Hildegard of Bingen and Christine de Pizan shine all the brighter against the bleak backdrop of medieval society. These remarkable women managed to carve out a space for their brilliance despite immense obstacles, leaving an indelible mark on history. But for the vast majority of women, even a glimmer of such opportunity was an impossible dream. Stifled by rigid gender roles, denied access to education, forever under the thumb of fathers, husbands, and religious authorities, they had pitifully few avenues to exercise their intellect. It's sobering to imagine the great minds lost to history, the potential world changers snuffed out by circumstance. How many peasant girls with the aptitude of a philosopher were instead consigned to a life of ceaseless drudgery? How many noble women with the makings of a scientist were wasted in the gilded cage of court, valued only as chess pieces in the game of dynastic marriage? The tragedy is not only in the injustice to the individual, but in the cost to society as a whole. Medieval civilization squandered half its brainpower, half its creativity, half its insight and ingenuity. A richer world of art, literature, invention, and knowledge could have flourished had women been allowed to fully participate. But those alternate realities went unrealized, suffocated by the heavy hand of patriarchal oppression. In our world, the flame of female genius was left to flicker in defiance of the darkness, nurtured in secret by courageous abbesses, passed hand to hand by wise women walking the knife's edge of accusations. It would take many long centuries for even the first cracks to appear in the fortress of misogyny. In the medieval world, an intelligent woman had vanishingly few paths that didn't lead to misery. Her brilliance was more curse than gift, more liability than asset. The churning mill of society was simply not built to accept anything more from the female sex than silent obedience, pliable ignorance, and ceaseless toil. To dare to question, to dare to know, to dare to dream of a life of the mind, such thoughts were punishable heresies. Perhaps a peasant mother, eyes distant with regret as she watched her curious daughter, could take some solace imagining a world where things were different. A world where her girl could learn to read, to study, and explore the scope of her abilities. A kinder world that nourished the aspirations of its daughters. But that world was not the one they inhabited. Not yet. The time of change was still far over the horizon, a hazy dawn whose light they could scarcely conceive. They could only walk the path before them, playing the ill-fitting roles society had assigned. Maybe the wiser ones whispered their hard-won truths to each other, a chain of oral wisdom linking generations, fragments of subversive poetry, scraps of philosophy, stitched into a quilt of quiet resistance. For those who dared to be more, who ached with the sorrow of unrealized potential, perhaps there was a defiant dignity in the struggle, a sense that simply by existing, simply by turning the wheels of their agile minds, they kept alive some dormant promise for the future. A promise that one day a girl would crack open a textbook with no one to stop her. One day, a woman would stand at a university podium and share her ideas without fear. One day, the only cage around a female mind would be the limits of her own imagination. That day was still distant, achingly out of reach for our medieval forebears. But in their perseverance, their unquenchable hunger for a better world, they helped lay the first stones on the long, winding path to progress. The path we still walk today, the path that leads from the ignorance and brutality of the past towards a brighter, more equitable future. A future where brilliance can flourish unfettered by arbitrary bounds of gender, class, or status. We owe a debt to the women of ages past, to those who bore the crushing weight of society's limitations, so that later generations could stand taller. In honoring their memory, in continuing their work, we light a candle against the darkness that once seemed all-consuming. The story of medieval women is a story of resilience in the face of soul-crushing adversity. It's a story that reminds us how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. Most of all, it's a story that demands to be told, to be heard, to be woven into the great tapestry of human history. For in its telling, we reclaim a legacy too long denied. We give voice to the voiceless, shining a light into the shadows where the struggles and triumphs of our foremothers lay hidden. In the end, that may be the most fitting tribute to the intelligent women of the Middle Ages, to ensure that their stories are not lost, that their sacrifices were not in vain, to carry forward the torch of knowledge and empowerment they kindled in a world that sought to snuff it out. It's a torch that burns brighter with each passing generation, illuminating the path ahead. A path where every mind, regardless of the body it inhabits, has the freedom to flourish and to soar. That is the promise we must strive to keep, the legacy we must labor to fulfill. So let us remember the brilliant women consigned to the darkness of medieval history. Let their stories be a guiding star, a reminder of the indomitable power of the human spirit to rise above even the most suffocating circumstances. In their memory, let us press forward, ever onward, towards a world where no light is left to languish in the shadows. As the 12th century dawned, a young woman of extraordinary intellect found herself constrained by the rigid gender expectations of her era. Born into minor nobility, Marie had always been a precocious child, quick-witted, curious, with a voracious appetite for knowledge. While her brothers were dispatched to be educated for knighthood or clergy, Marie was consigned to a cloistered existence within the family manor. She watched with barely concealed envy as they pored over Latin manuscripts, debating philosophy and theology. The abbey where her eldest brother studied housed an impressive library, filled with treasures of scholarship Marie yearned to explore. But when she dared broach the subject with her father, his rebuke was swift and final. Such lofty pursuits were not meant for daughters, he declared sternly. Her role was to master the womanly arts that would win her a worthy husband. So Marie learned to stem her questions, to keep her sharp observations to herself. She committed herself to embroidery, to memorizing psalms, to managing the household servants with quiet efficiency. All the while, her agile mind privately churned, spinning out complex theories and composing elaborate stories she dared not voice aloud. At 16, she was duly married off to a neighbouring lord, a man nearly twice her age. He proved to be a cold and taciturn master, content to let his bright young bride languish in loneliness, isolated in his draughty estate. Marie bore the dullness of her days with outward grace, ever the poised and proper lady. But inside, she nurtured a secret inner world, alive with vibrant characters and daring ideas. She wrote furtively by candlelight, in the deepest hours of the night, elegant verses and allegorical tales, rich with clever subtexts that critiqued the injustices she saw all around her. The women in her stories wielded wisdom and influence, subtly subverting the patriarchal order. It was a perilous endeavour, for a woman who dared to pen her own thoughts risked being labelled a dangerous rebel, perhaps even a heretic. But for Marie, the act of creation was an essential outlet, a hidden rebellion against the confines of her life. She dreamed of a world in which her voice could ring out proudly, where her keen intellect could be celebrated rather than smothered. In the tales she spun, she conjured that world into being, even if she could inhabit it only in the secret realms of her own imagination. Though Marie's writings were destined to remain unseen in her own lifetime, her story reflects the unsung brilliance of countless women of her age, the stifled visionaries and scholars, the artists and philosophers whose talents were buried beneath the weight of custom and oppression. In the face of towering barriers, they nurtured the life of the mind in small, defiant ways, planting seeds of change that would slowly take root over the centuries to come. But most women, however sharp-minded, had little space for even such veiled forms of self-expression. The demands of daily survival left scant room for subversive scribblings. Hemmed in by poverty, illiteracy, and the constant perils of disease and violence, peasant women were valued primarily for their labour, their fertility, and their meek obedience to male authority. For a woman like Martha, a quick-witted farmer's wife renowned for her clever problem-solving, that meant walking a precarious line. Her husband John, though not an unkind man, was staunchly traditional in his view of wifely duties. He took great pride in Martha's skill at managing their meagre resources, her knack for turning the most scanty items into filling meals. Yet he also bristled whenever her suggestions strayed too far beyond the domestic sphere. When their only cow fell ill, wasting away before their eyes, John pushed back against Martha's urging to alter the animal's feed, to try a tincture of herbs she'd seen their neighbour use to good effect. Women's meddling, he grumbled, was liable to do more harm than good. Best to leave such matters to him and the other men. But as the cow continued to sicken and their children grew hungry, Martha took matters into her own hands. Rising early while John still slept, she slipped out to the barn to administer the herbal remedy. For several days she repeated this covert mission, holding her breath as the cow began to rally. Only when the animal was restored to full health did she dare reveal her actions to her husband. To her relief, John's joy at their narrow escape from ruin seemed to overshadow his irritation at her unauthorized initiative. He even praised her quick thinking in an uncharacteristic display of gratitude. But when she tried to build on that goodwill, to propose further changes to their farming practices, his resentment came flooding back. He accused her of overstepping her bounds, of disrespecting his authority as head of the household. Didn't she understand her place? Wasn't she content with her God-given role? His scolding left Martha fighting back tears of frustration, her fists clenched with all the words she dared not say. It was a pattern that would repeat itself again and again over the years. Martha's resourcefulness and intelligence repeatedly bumping up against the rigid confines of her prescribed place. Her novel notions about crop rotation, her clever tweaks to their ancient loom, her insightful suggestions for settling disputes among their neighbours, all met with the same wary resistance from John and the other men. Slowly, she learned to temper her speech, to couch her ideas in terms of wifely concern, rather than outright advice. She chose her battles carefully, finding subtle ways to nudge her husband toward better decisions without bruising his fragile sense of control. It was an intricate dance, a delicate balancing act that required all her native wit and intuition. But even the most careful choreography could not always protect clever women from the consequences of overstepping. In a world shadowed by superstition, where any deviation from prescribed norms could trigger fear and suspicion, an intellect that shone too brightly invited perilous accusations of the worst kind. For Magdalena, the village wise woman, that danger lurked constantly beneath the surface of her life. Inherited from her mother, her vast knowledge of herbal medicine was held in high esteem throughout the region. From simple salves for rashes and coughs to more complex preparations for pain in childbirth, Magdalena's gentle hands could work near miracles. But not everyone looked kindly upon her uncanny abilities. Some muttered about the unnatural speed with which she could heal a festering wound, or the eerie accuracy of her predictions about a pregnancy's outcome. There were whispers about the pets and children who seemed strangely drawn to her, about the charm she seemed to cast over their menfolk as she tended to their ills. Magdalena went about her work with a heavy sense of caution, keenly aware of the threat that constantly shadowed her. She was careful to cloak her skill in the trappings of piety, always invoking God's name as she plied her craft. She made a show of attending Mass, of slipping coins to the church poor box, hoping to deflect any hint of impiety. But as pestilence swept through the countryside, leaving illness and death in its wake, the tide of rumors began to turn against her. When the blacksmith's son wasted away despite her most potent tonics, the grieving father pointed an accusing finger in her direction. When crops failed and cows went dry, anxious whispers laid the blame at her door. The final blow came when the miller's wife, writhing in the pains of a difficult labor, expired mere moments after Magdalena hurried from her bedside. By nightfall, an angry mob had assembled outside the wise woman's cottage, torches aloft, howling for retribution against the witch in their midst. In vain, Magdalena pleaded her innocence, invoking years of faithful service and stoic piety. But reason held no sway in the face of primal fear. She was hauled before a hastily assembled tribunal, forced to endure cruel tests and interrogations designed to confirm her guilt. Through it all, Magdalena clung to her own deep knowledge of the workings of the body, of the natural world, of the folly and cruelty of the ignorant. Even as the flames licked at her feet and the smoke choked her lungs, she held fast to the conviction that the truth of her life could never be erased by the lies that took it. Her death sent a chilling message to any woman who dared to step beyond the confines of her prescribed place. No matter how nobly earned or wisely used, a gift that transcended the bounds of male control was a thing to be feared, reviled, violently extinguished. The tragedy of Magdalena's fate would echo through generations, a haunting reminder of the perils facing any woman who dared to know too much. But even those who avoided the pyre could find themselves facing a doom of a different kind. For noble women, educated enough to hold their own in the lofty realms of statecraft and diplomacy, peril often came cloaked in courtly charm and dazzling privilege. Few figures embodied that truth more vividly than Eleanor of Aquitaine, the brilliant and ambitious queen who left an indelible mark on the 12th century. Born into a life of immense wealth and influence, Eleanor was a woman of rare intellect and daring, fluent in multiple languages, schooled in literature and philosophy, with a keen eye for political intrigue. As Queen first of France and later of England, Eleanor's swift mind and persuasive powers made her an indispensable partner in governance. She was an adept negotiator, a canny strategist, a trusted advisor to the men who claimed dominion over her. But that same quick wit and forceful personality also marked her as a threat, a woman who knew too much and wielded too much sway. Her marriage to Henry II was a tempestuous dance of collaboration and conflict, two formidable intellects constantly vying for control. When Eleanor's ambitions clashed with Henry's, when her influence over their sons seemed to challenge his own, the king lashed out with all the wounded pride of a man who feared being overshadowed. For 16 long years, Eleanor languished in captivity, confined to a succession of castles at Henry's command. Though her cage was gilded, its bars were no less real, a stark reminder that even the most exceptional woman was still ultimately at the mercy of male authority. But Eleanor's story also speaks to the enduring power of a brilliant mind, the tenacity of a spirit that refuses to be broken. Through the long years of isolation, she remained a force to be reckoned with, writing letters, receiving visitors, weaving alliances, holding court in all but name. Her influence continued to shape events, even from behind the castle walls. And when at last she re-emerged after Henry's death, Eleanor did so with all the poise and purpose of a woman who had never truly been conquered. In her 7th decade, she embarked on one final grand adventure, journeying across Europe to fetch the chosen bride of her favourite son, Richard the Lionheart. It was a fitting coda to a life that embodied both the potential and the peril of female power, in an age that sought to suppress it. Eleanor's story, in all its triumphant and tragic dimensions, stands as a testament to the unquenchable resilience of women's minds and spirits, even in the face of overwhelming odds. That resilience found its purest expression in the rare few who managed, against all odds, to make their voices heard across the ages. Women like Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century Benedictine abbess who rose to become one of the most influential figures of her time. Hildegard was a Renaissance woman centuries before the term was coined, a visionary theologian, a gifted composer, a pioneering scientist and healer. From the cloistered world of her abbey, she corresponded with popes and kings, offering counsel on matters both spiritual and worldly. Her soaring hymns and vivid spiritual writings earned her renown as a prophet and a saint. But Hildegard's genius extended far beyond the realm of religion. She was a keen observer of the natural world, meticulously cataloguing the healing properties of plants and minerals. She wrote treatises on medicine and physiology that were centuries ahead of their time, advocating for a holistic understanding of the human body and mind. In a world that saw women as inherently inferior, Hildegard dared to assert the divine nature of female wisdom. She spoke of the feminine divine, a concept that challenged the patriarchal foundations of the Church. Her visions, which she recorded in stunning artistic detail, often centered on female figures: Eve, the Virgin Mary, the feminine aspect of God herself. For Hildegard, the pursuit of knowledge was an act of spiritual devotion, a way of honoring the Creator by seeking to understand the intricacies of creation. She saw no contradiction between faith and reason, between piety and intellectual rigor. In her life and work, she embodied the possibility of a world in which women's minds could flourish in service of the highest ideals. Centuries later, that possibility began to inch closer to reality, thanks in part to trailblazers like Christine de Pizan. Born in Italy in 1364, Christine had the rare good fortune to be raised by a father who believed in educating daughters as well as sons. From a young age, she reveled in the world of books and ideas, absorbing the great works of classical literature and philosophy. When Christine's husband died suddenly, leaving her a widow at 25 with 3 young children to support, she turned to her pen as a means of survival. Over the next 3 decades, she produced an astonishing body of work, poetry, prose, polemic, that established her as Europe's first professional female author. In her most famous work, the Book of the City of Ladies, Christine crafted a brilliant defense of women's intellectual and moral worth. Drawing on examples from history and literature, She constructed an imaginary city populated by women of virtue, wisdom, and accomplishment, a powerful rebuttal to the misogynistic attitudes of her day. Through her writings, Christine challenged the notion that women were inherently inferior to men, that their proper role was one of submissive domesticity. She argued for women's right to education, to participation in public life, to recognition of their essential humanity. Her voice was a clarion call, a bold assertion of female dignity in the face of entrenched oppression. Christine's legacy echoed through the centuries, inspiring generations of women writers and thinkers who dared to dream of a different world. But her story also underscores the halting nature of progress, the slow and fitful pace of change in women's lives. For even as a handful of extraordinary figures like Hildegard and Christine rose to prominence, the vast majority of women in medieval times remained trapped in a web of ignorance, poverty, and powerlessness. The glimmers of possibility that their stories represent only throw into sharper relief the bleak reality that was the lot of most. To be born female in that age was to be born into a life circumscribed by forces beyond one's control, by the dictates of church and state, by the whims of fathers and husbands, by the unyielding demands of biology and back-breaking labor. It was to be valued primarily for one's utility, as a bearer of heirs, a keeper of hearths, a vessel of male desire. In that context, the mere act of asserting one's intellect, of daring to think and question and create, was a subversive act. It required a special kind of bravery, a willingness to defy the weight of societal expectation and risk the consequences of stepping out of line. The fact that any women managed to do so, to leave a mark on history in the face of such overwhelming odds, is a testament to the unquenchable human spirit, the spark of genius that refuses to be extinguished, no matter how hostile the climate. But it's also a sober reminder of how much potential was lost, how many brilliant minds were stifled and silenced by the suffocating strictures of the age. For every Hildegard or Christine who managed to break through, there were countless others whose talents were buried, whose voices were never heard. As we look back across the centuries, it's tempting to see the march of progress as a straight line, a steady upward trajectory from darkness to enlightenment. But the reality is far more complex, far more uneven. Even today, with all the hard-won gains of the intervening years, the legacy of those early struggles remains palpable. Women continue to face barriers and biases, to have their worth and their wisdom called into question. The fight for true equality, for a world in which every mind can flourish regardless of gender, is still far from won. But in the stories of those long ago pioneers, in their courage and their resilience and their stubborn refusal to be less than they were, we can find both inspiration and instruction. They remind us of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. They challenge us to pick up the torch they lit, to continue the work of building a world in which no brilliant mind is left to languish in the shadows. So let us honor them, those brave and brilliant women of ages past. Let us remember their names, celebrate their triumphs, mourn their losses. Let us draw strength from their example, even as we work to create a future in which their struggles will seem like a distant memory. And let us never forget the lesson at the heart of their stories, that the fight for women's minds and hearts and souls is always and ever a fight for the very soul of our civilization. It is a fight that demands our fiercest commitment, our most unyielding resolve. For in the end, there can be no true progress for any of us until the full measure of women's humanity is recognized and uplifted and affirmed. That is the charge that echoes down to us from the distant past, the unfinished work that falls to us. As we've seen, the extraordinary accomplishments of women like Hildegard of Bingen and Christine de Pizan shine all the brighter against the bleak backdrop of the Middle Ages. Their stories are a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit, to the irrepressible force of a brilliant mind, no matter how hostile the circumstances. But for each Hildegard or Christine whose name has endured through the centuries, there were doubtless countless more women of remarkable intellect and potential, whose talents were stifled, suppressed, lost to history. Women who yearned to learn, to create, to contribute, but who were denied education, agency, opportunity at every turn. Who knows what marvels they might have achieved, what advances in art, literature, science, philosophy they might have pioneered, had they not been so confined by the rigid roles and restrictions of their time. It's a poignant thought, a somber reflection as we lay here in the stillness of the night, to think of all those keen minds, those sparks of genius, snuffed out by a world that could not see their worth, that feared their power, a world that would brutally punish a woman for the crime of being too clever, too curious, too bold. In the face of such oppression, the few who manage to break through, to leave their mark, are all the more extraordinary. They are a reminder of the unquenchable nature of the human thirst for knowledge, for self-expression. A reminder that no matter how dark the night, the spark of the mind, of the soul, endures. And slowly, gradually, as the centuries unfolded, more and more of those sparks began to break through the darkness. The Renaissance in the 14th to 17th centuries saw a flourishing of art, science, and humanism. While women remained largely excluded from formal education, a few intrepid figures like the Italian noblewoman Isotta Nogarola gained renown for their learning and literary talents. The 18th century Age of Enlightenment brought more challenges to traditional gender roles. In the vibrant intellectual culture of the French salons, brilliant women like Madame de Staël and Émilie du Châtelet held their own in philosophical and scientific discourse with the great male minds of the day. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the fight for women's rights began to gather momentum. Brave suffragettes like Susan B. Anthony and Emmeline Pankhurst fought tirelessly for the vote, for access to education and the professions. Pioneering scientists like Marie Curie and Emmy Noether made groundbreaking discoveries, shattering stereotypes about women's intellectual capabilities. But even as opportunities expanded, prejudices persisted. Women who dared to excel in male-dominated fields faced ridicule, resistance, harassment. They had to work twice as hard to prove themselves, to be taken seriously. And for women of colour, the barriers were even higher, the discrimination even more intense. So as we drift off to sleep, let us hold in our hearts the memory of all those brilliant women of the past who were held back, held down, silenced by a world that did not know their value. Let us honour their struggles, their resilience, their unsung triumphs. And let us dream of a world where no spark of talent is ever extinguished, where every mind has the chance to shine, to soar, regardless of gender, regardless of circumstance. A world where the haunting question of what might have been need never be asked again. It's a dream we're still striving for, still reaching towards. But as we've seen from the inspiring stories of the past, it's a dream that, slowly but surely, we are bringing closer to reality with each passing generation. The path may be long, the progress slow, the setbacks many, but the arc of history bends towards justice, towards enlightenment. And one day, perhaps, the dark ages of suppression and silence will be but a distant memory, a cautionary tale from a less enlightened time. So let us hold fast to that hope, that vision, as we surrender to sleep's sweet embrace. Let the stories of those brilliant, indomitable women of the past be the spark that lights our dreams, that guides us onwards through the challenges of our own time. For in the end, the mind, the soul, the human spirit, they are an unstoppable force, a light that no darkness can ever fully extinguish. And as long as we keep striving, keep dreaming, keep pushing forward, there is no limit to what we can achieve together. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be filled with the shining lights of all the brilliant minds, past and present, who have illuminated our world. And may you wake with the courage and conviction to add your own light to that endless, brilliant constellation. As the wise woman's screams faded into the crackling flames, the resentful villagers looked on, their faces flickering with a grim satisfaction. In their eyes, justice had been served. A dangerous witch had been purged from their midst. But in truth, they had destroyed one of the brightest lights in their community. A healer, a midwife, a font of knowledge, snuffed out by ignorance and fear. Such was the precarious fate of intelligent women in the Middle Ages. No matter how much good they did, how many lives they saved or enriched, they walked a razor's edge. A woman's wisdom was a dangerous thing in a world ruled by men who saw them as little more than chattel. Even for those born to privilege, a keen mind could be as much a curse as a blessing. Educated noblewomen had to learn to wield their intellect like a finely balanced sword. One false move could spell ruin. They were expected to be charming but not too clever, astute but never outshining the men around them. It was a precarious dance indeed. Perhaps no woman walked this tightrope more adeptly than Eleanor of Aquitaine. Born in 1122 to one of the wealthiest and most powerful noble families in France, Eleanor was renowned for her beauty, wit, and intelligence. She received an exceptional education for a woman of her time, learning Latin, music, literature, and the art of courtly love. At just 15, Eleanor married King Louis VII of France, becoming queen. But this brilliant young woman was not content to be a mere ornament on the arm of a king. She was determined to make her mark. During the Second Crusade, Eleanor shocked the court by insisting on accompanying her husband to the Holy Land. She assembled her own army and rode at their head, clad in armor like an Amazon of old. But Eleanor's boldness and influence began to chafe at King Louis. Their marriage became strained, and when she sought an annulment, he readily agreed. Their union was dissolved on grounds of consanguinity, a flimsy pretext, as such close blood ties had never bothered the church before. In truth, Louis simply couldn't handle a wife as formidable as Eleanor. Mere weeks after the annulment, Eleanor married again, this time to Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. It was a union that would change the face of Europe. When Henry became King of England in 1154, Eleanor became Queen of England and the most powerful woman in Europe. For a time, Eleanor and Henry were an unstoppable partnership. She governed England as regent while he campaigned in France. She bore him 8 children, including the future Richard the Lionheart and King John. Her court at Poitiers became a renowned centre of culture, where troubadours and poets celebrated courtly love. But as Eleanor's power and influence grew, so did Henry's resentment. He was a man who expected absolute obedience from his wife, and Eleanor was not a woman to be ruled. The breaking point came in 1173, when Eleanor's sons, encouraged by their mother, rebelled against Henry. Enraged, Henry had Eleanor arrested and imprisoned. This brilliant, indomitable woman spent the next 16 years confined to various castles, essentially under house arrest. It was a fate that would have broken a lesser spirit, but not Eleanor. Even in captivity, she continued to wield influence, corresponding with her sons and maintaining her network of allies. Only after Henry's death in 1189 was Eleanor finally freed. And remarkably, at 67 years old, she lost no time in reasserting her power. With her favoured son Richard now on the throne, Eleanor rode out to personally negotiate his marriage, and later governed as regent in his absence. This indomitable woman continued to shape the politics of Europe well into her 70s. Eleanor of Aquitaine's story is a testament to the resilience and brilliance of medieval women who refused to be cowed by the constraints of their society. But for every Eleanor, there were countless intelligent women who were crushed beneath the wheel of oppression. Women whose lights were dimmed, whose potential was squandered, simply because they had the misfortune to be born in an age that feared and suppressed the feminine intellect. Yet even in the darkest of times, there were glimmers of hope. Extraordinary women who, through sheer grit and brilliance, managed to leave their mark on history. Women like Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century German Benedictine abbess, who was a true Renaissance woman centuries before the Renaissance. Born in 1098 to a noble family, Hildegard was tithed to the church at a young age. She entered a Benedictine monastery at Disibodenberg, where she received a rudimentary education, a rarity for a girl in those times. But Hildegard's brilliance quickly outshone her limited schooling. From a young age, Hildegard was blessed, or perhaps cursed, with vivid spiritual visions. In her early 40s, she received a divine command to write down these visions. The result was her first work, Scivias, a dazzling theological treatise that wove together her intense visionary experiences with profound spiritual insights. But Hildegard was far more than a mystic. She was a polymath whose interests spanned music, science, medicine, and philosophy. She composed liturgical chants of haunting beauty, and her lyrical musical play, the Ordo Virtutum, is considered the oldest surviving morality play. In the field of medicine, Hildegard was centuries ahead of her time. She authored 2 volumes on natural healing and the medicinal uses of plants, stones, fish, reptiles, and animals. She practiced holistic healing, emphasizing the importance of balance and the interconnectedness of the human body with the natural world. As if this wasn't enough, Hildegard also found time to correspond with popes, emperors, and kings, offering her wisdom on matters of church and state. She even embarked on 4 preaching tours across Germany, a feat unheard of for a woman in the 12th century. Hildegard accomplished all of this while serving as the head of her own monastery. She had fought for the right to establish a separate convent at Rupertsberg, where she could lead her sisters without male interference. It was a bold move, one that spoke to her fierce independence and leadership. In a world where women were expected to be silent and submissive, Hildegard of Bingen's voice rang out loud and clear. Her brilliance, her versatility, her unflinching courage in the face of societal constraints, all of these made her a true anomaly of her age, a shining star in a dark sky. And yet, even Hildegard, with all her gifts and all her influence, could not entirely escape the misogyny of her era. When she and her sisters attempted to give burial to an excommunicated nobleman, the church authorities not only refused her, but punished her entire convent with an interdict. The price of defiance was high, even for a woman as exceptional as Hildegard. Another woman who dared to defy the limitations of her sex was Christine de Pisan, often hailed as the first professional woman writer in Europe. Born in Venice in 1364, Christine had the good fortune to be the daughter of a scholar who believed in educating his daughter. When her family moved to Paris, Christine enjoyed access to the royal court and one of the finest libraries in Europe. At 15, Christine married and had 3 children. But when her husband died just a decade later, she found herself in a precarious position. A widow with small children, no male protection, and substantial debts. Christine turned to the one thing she had left, her intellect. In a move that was unheard of for a woman of her time, Christine began to write for a living. She started with poetry, crafting ballads and love songs that quickly gained popularity in the Parisian court. But Christine was not content to be a mere court entertainer. She had a higher purpose in mind. In 1405, Christine published her most famous work, the Book of the City of Ladies. In this groundbreaking text, Christine crafted an allegorical city populated by great women from history and legend. From ancient philosophers to Christian saints, these women served as a powerful rebuttal to to the misogynistic attitudes of the day. Through her writing, Christine asserted the intellectual and moral equality of women. She argued against the notion of women's inferiority, pointing out the societal constraints that limited their opportunities. She advocated for women's education and proclaimed their capacity for leadership and virtue. For a woman to make such bold claims in the 15th century was nothing short of revolutionary. Christine faced harsh criticism and mockery from many of her male contemporaries, but she refused to be silenced. She continued to write prolifically, producing works of politics, philosophy, and history, always with an eye towards championing the cause of women. In a world where intellectual pursuits were seen as the exclusive domain of men, Christine de Pizan dared to pick up a pen and make her voice heard. Her legacy echoes down through the centuries, a testament to the power of the female mind to shine even in the most oppressive of circumstances. As we reflect on the lives of these extraordinary women, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Hildegard of Bingen, Christine de Pizan, it's easy to marvel at their accomplishments. Against all odds, in the face of overwhelming societal oppression, they managed to leave an indelible mark on history. But let us not forget the countless other women whose names have been lost to time: the healers and the midwives, the artists and the poets, the thinkers and the dreamers. Women whose brilliance was snuffed out by a world that couldn't comprehend their value. The Middle Ages were a brutal time for intelligent women. Their minds were caged, their spirits crushed, their potential wasted. And yet, the stories of those few who managed to break free serve as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. They are a testament to the unquenchable thirst for knowledge, the irrepressible urge to create and to question and to explore. Today, we stand on the shoulders of these giants. We are the heirs to their legacy, the beneficiaries of their struggles. And while we have come far, the echoes of that oppression still reverberate through our world. In the ongoing fight for education, for equality, for the right to be heard, we carry the torch that they lit so long ago. So let us remember them, let us honor them, and let us continue their work until the day when every woman, everywhere, can let her brilliance shine unhindered. Until the day when the phrase intelligent woman is no longer an oxymoron, but a glorious reality. As we drift off to sleep, let our dreams be filled with visions of a world where every mind is valued, every voice is heard, and every light is allowed to shine. A world that those brilliant medieval women could scarcely have imagined, but one that we have the power to create. One story, one voice, one dream at a time. For centuries, women like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Hildegard of Bingen proved themselves the intellectual equals of men, if not their superiors, in an age when such a notion was not just rare, it was revolutionary. Eleanor of Aquitaine's life in particular illustrates both the potential for a truly exceptional woman to wield immense influence and the drastic measures men in power would take to contain such a threat. Born around 1122 as the daughter of William X, the Duke of Aquitaine, Eleanor was heir to a vast territory that comprised nearly a third of modern France. Even as a young girl, she was known for her sharp wit, striking beauty, and a boldness that both captivated and unsettled those around her. In 1137, at just 15 years old, Eleanor married the heir to the French throne, Louis VII, and became Queen of France. It was an extraordinary position of power for a woman of her time. As Queen, Eleanor's clever mind and forceful personality made her a key player in the politics and intrigues of the court. She was a savvy diplomat, a shrewd judge of character, and fiercely independent in an age when women were expected to be meek and submissive. But Eleanor's intelligence and strong will soon put her at odds with her pious monk-like husband. Their marriage grew strained, especially after Eleanor accompanied Louis on the disastrous Second Crusade to the Holy Land. The campaign was a failure, and rumours swirled that Eleanor had engaged in an affair with her uncle, Raymond of Poitiers. Humiliated and resentful, Louis had the marriage annulled in 1152. But Eleanor was not disgraced, far from it. Just 6 weeks later, she married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, who would soon become King Henry II of England. As Queen of England, Eleanor continued to be a force to be reckoned with, governing her own lands, influencing policy, and bearing Henry 8 children. However, Eleanor's power was always contingent on the goodwill of the men around her. When she supported her sons in a rebellion against Henry in 1173, the enraged king had Eleanor imprisoned for 16 long years. Even one of the most brilliant and influential women of the Middle Ages could not escape the ultimate authority of her husband. Eleanor's story is a testament to both the heights a truly exceptional woman could reach in medieval society and the steep price she could pay for daring to challenge the social order. While Eleanor languished in captivity, another remarkable woman was pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible for her sex in a different realm, that of the mind and spirit. Hildegard of Bingen, born in 1098 in the lush Rhineland Valley, was a Benedictine abbess, philosopher, composer, and visionary. At a time when most nuns were relegated to simple domestic tasks, Hildegard managed to carve out a space to develop her extraordinary gifts. As the abbess of her own monastery, she enjoyed a degree of protection and autonomy that allowed her intellectual and artistic genius to flourish. Hildegard wrote extensively on theology, natural science, and medicine. She corresponded with popes, emperors, and kings, offering counsel and even admonishments. She composed enchanting hymns and sacred music, which are still performed today, and she recorded her mystical religious visions in vivid detail, creating stunning illuminated manuscripts. In many ways, Hildegard was a medieval Renaissance woman, centuries before the Renaissance. Her brilliant mind roamed freely across disciplines, drawing connections and making discoveries that were astonishingly ahead of her time. She wrote treatises on the medicinal uses of plants, animals, and stones, effectively laying the foundations for the study of natural science in Europe. Her compositions helped to revolutionize medieval church music, and her spiritual writings and prophecies made her one of the most influential religious figures of her age. Yet even Hildegard, with all her gifts and achievements, had to tread carefully in a world dominated by men. She prefaced her works with protestations of humility and ignorance, insisting that her knowledge came directly from God, because claiming it as her own would have been dangerously arrogant for a woman. The stories of women like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Hildegard of Bingen are all the more remarkable because they are so exceptional. For the vast majority of women in medieval Europe, life was a constant struggle against the confines of a rigid patriarchal society. Most were illiterate, their horizons bounded by the walls of their home and village. They had almost no control over their own destinies, subject to the whims and wishes of fathers, husbands, and sons. Education, independence, the chance to develop and use their minds. These were luxuries few medieval women could dream of. Those who did manage to learn and achieve despite the odds are all the more extraordinary for their rarity. They are the brilliant exceptions that prove the bleak rule of women's suppression and subjugation in the Middle Ages. But they are also the glimmers of light that manage to pierce through the darkness, the first faint flourishings of female genius that would, slowly and fitfully, grow and spread in the centuries to come. From the poetesses of the Renaissance to the bluestockings of the Enlightenment, from the suffragettes of the 19th century to the feminists of 2380 our own time, the long struggle for women's rights and recognition has been carried forward by the spiritual descendants of those medieval foremothers. As we drift off to sleep, let us hold in our hearts the stories of those long ago women, both the known and the unknown, the celebrated and the forgotten. Let us honor their struggles and their triumphs. And remember that the freedoms we enjoy today were built on the foundation of their courage and resilience. And as we return to the waking world, perhaps we will carry with us a newfound appreciation for the remarkable women in our own lives, the thinkers and dreamers, the creators and leaders, the bold spirits who continue to push against the boundaries of what is possible and to light the way forward for us all. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the little-known history of medieval women. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with a friend who might find it interesting. There are so many more fascinating stories waiting to be told, and I look forward to sharing them with you. Until next time, sweet dreams.